Hello and welcome to Monarch Park Collective. Here you have your kind of classic 2000s china cabinet, bit dated, and in this video we're going to update this piece and bring it into a modern look. On this channel you're going to see a lot of furniture being salvaged and hopefully a lot of furniture being completely rethought. Kind of like with this piece here. So this was a curb alert on Facebook. Wasn't really meant to go to the trash, but the owner just was kind of finished with it. So we were able to get this piece and kind of salvage it. Here I'm just disassembling it. There's a lot of moving parts to this piece. Lots of glass, lots of mirrors, and it had these strips on the back that had to be removed. To make this piece a little bit more modern, we needed to get this decorative piece off the top. I believe they call this a finial. It might be a little bit bigger than a typical finial, but that's what I'm calling it. So here, I'm just loosening the glue blocks. And this will allow the top to be a little bit more squared off and modern. Later, I add a shelf to the top of this piece, which is actually going to be, most of that build is off camera. One thing I didn't necessarily want this channel to be is a woodworking channel. I have a lot of woodworking experience. And so in this video, you're going to see some parts to this particular piece that just kind of appear. They're not shown, the build isn't shown in the video. So, but we'll get to some of that stuff in the future. So here, just continuing disassembly, getting the doors off. There's a lot of glass in this piece, and so I have to get this glass out of the doors. I have to get the glass out of the front and the sides, both right and left, have to have the glass removed. And it's just a little thin, and I was a little concerned about it being easily breakable, so taking my time here. Also, a note about labeling things. It's really good for me to label everything. Sometimes it's obvious where the parts go back later, but it's nice during reassembly to not have to actually think about where things are going and rather just put them back when you're finished. Here's a close-up of the existing finish. Just kind of zooming in here so you guys can see it. Kind of just your typical reddish cherry look. Very common for this type of furniture in this era here. One of the most important things you can do before altering a finish is clean it. I imagine this piece of furniture probably had some furniture polish on it over years, so before tackling this, it's important to wipe it down. Just using a kind of a commercial degreaser here to wipe it down. You don't have to get crazy, just get it good and wet and wipe it and you should be good to go. Here I'm beginning to remove some of the existing finish from these rails. These rails hold the glass. And again, as I mentioned before, my vision for this piece was kind of a two-tone. So I need to knock this finish off. I want to make it a little bit more of a neutral brown rather than this real red color. So here I'm just scraping the finish off and preparing the wood for staining it. This is a Baca wood scraper. It's great for smoothing wood, but it's also great for removing a finish like this. And it makes some pretty big pieces, so it's not a lot of dust, doesn't get up in the air very much. It's better for your lungs. It's a little bit more elbow grease, but I don't really mind. So here I'm just knocking the rest of this finish off this section to demonstrate, and by hand, this is I think 80 or maybe 100. Pretty aggressive, trying to just remove the last little bit of finish. And while this isn't real time, you can see how quickly this goes. This only took a few minutes to get it scraped and to get it sanded back. And here I'm just vacuuming the dust off so you can get an idea of how clean this really is. There's a little flute there, little concave area that has to be done by hand as well. But you can see how clean this comes in preparation for staining. So, like so many others, why sand by hand when you can sand with a machine? So I broke out the electric sander and started knocking out the rest of this. I have dust extraction too, so that's kind of nice. And that brings me to an important point. If you can keep your surface free of dust as you're working, it really is better for the product later. It's not just better for your lungs, it's better because this fine dust can get down in the grains of the wood and keep it from taking stain properly. It'll look splotchy, it just won't take right. So here, just kind of finishing up these rails and getting ready to stain them here in a moment. All right, on to some scuff sanding. The remainder of this project is going to be painted, so I'm just preparing the existing finish for paint. You do not have to strip back the entire finish. Here I'm using some 220 and I'm just preparing the surface for paint. As you can see, as you do this, you need to really be consistent in how you sand. So many will just kind of run a piece of sandpaper over a surface and it doesn't actually dull the entire finish. So as you can see in this picture here, it's beginning to kind of cloud the finish, and that's what you want. You want to see a real consistent powdery look over the entire surface. That's how you know you've prepared it properly. Here I'm applying some stain to the surface. I ended up not keeping this shelf stained. I didn't really like the way it took the stain. This piece of lumber was like a cheap piece of veneer, and it ended up, as you can see, looking almost exactly like the piece did originally, which is what I did not want. So I decided later to prime and paint this section. The rails and the stiles that hold the glass in the back definitely looked much more brown, which is what I wanted, something neutral. Okay, it's time to prime. This was a bit of a difficult piece to prime because of the horizontals and verticals, but ended up turning out really good. I'm using white pigmented shellac. This primer sands back really nice. That's why I like it. You can put this stuff on, and when you sand it, it just becomes very smooth. It sands to a really fine powder. So now it's time to prepare the surface for the first coat of paint. One of those is, of course, sanding back the primer. And here I have these doors, and typically I paint my doors flat. But because of how fine these doors are, I decided to put some hooks into them. I've never actually done this until today, so I quite like it. And you can see here it worked out pretty good. And it moves a little bit when you spray it, but we had a little bit of a breeze anyway, so some of that isn't just from the sprayer. Another benefit to hanging the doors is you can paint both sides simultaneously. They dry simultaneously, so when you're ready to recoat, you can recoat both sides. As I said before, I typically paint my doors flat, so you have to paint it, let it dry, sand it back, flip it, paint it, let it dry, sand it back, and repeat. And so this definitely sped up the process of painting these doors. And now on to the cabinet itself. This is definitely one of the most rewarding parts. I love the contrast between the black and white. It's a lot of fun to spray this thing out and see it start to come to life. And as I said earlier, I decided to paint this shelf black, as you can see me doing here. Off camera, I sanded the cabinet and the doors, and here I'm blowing the dust off and using a microfiber rag to kind of pick up all of that sanding dust prior to putting on the final coat. And here I'm putting on the final coat on the cabinet and the doors. After the final coat of paint, I'm preparing to assemble the top of this cabinet. There were these lights that haven't been shown yet, and I kept them. I had removed them previously, and I'm just putting them back in here and tightening down the collar, checking to make sure they're tight, fishing the power cord back through the hole that I drilled. This is going to be the last opportunity I get to make sure all this stuff works, so testing it is imperative. Next is the installation of the top shelf that I built off camera. I got to thinking about how I wanted to fasten this. I wanted to use glue, but I thought better of it given that those lights were in there, and I wanted to make sure that this top could be removed later in the event that those lights had to be replaced. The bulbs can be replaced from inside the cabinet itself, but not the fixture. So here I'm just measuring to make sure that it's centered and that my reveals are where I want them to be. And then I use 18 gauge brad nails to fasten it. Here I do a two-man job by myself. This is not heavy. It's just sized to a point where it's hard for me to lift it and get it where I want it, but I was able to do it without destroying it. Here I'm clamping the cabinet to the base, making sure that it's flush in the front and the sides prior to attaching it. I'm using this piece of parchment paper to protect the finish from the clamp. After checking it for flush and making sure that the clamps are tight, I use some screws to fasten the top and the bottom together. Here I'm continuing with assembly, placing the hinges back on and the doors themselves. I also install some magnet catches for the doors and the pulls for the doors. Next, I'm installing the back panels. This was originally mirror, so I decided to cut individual pieces, which is what the mirrors were, individual pieces, and just use those as templates to cut each one of these. They were actually 3 different sizes for these 6 panels. The next step was to install the glass. This glass is very thin. It's kind of nerve-wracking to have to move it around, so I brought the piece inside. I didn't want to move it after I installed the glass. This glass is held in by little plastic tabs with a screw. So you see here I'm installing those. It's about 6 to 8 of those per piece. I did the front first and then do the sides, otherwise you can't access the front. And here I'm installing the glass into the doors. Here I'm placing the glass shelves. These are much thicker and not nearly as hard to install. Felt good to be done with the glass. Removing my labels and cleaning the glass, just putting some final touches on this piece. Alright, let's look back at where we started. I saved this china cabinet from the curb, and after a few days of work, this is the end result. It's a two-toned cabinet with a top shelf added and a lower shelf added as well.